Okay, it's early morning, the desk is cleared besides the monitor, and we have a bunch of boxes here. We're going to be building a PC, you guessed it correctly, and it also says it in the title. Our budget for this video is $450. This time we're going with a Ryzen 3 3200G processor as opposed to last time with the i3 from Intel. Now the total for all these components was $464. Prices may vary because of the coronavirus and stuff, but I just want to say that there are no extras here besides fans. I mean, you could pick the fans, you could go without fans completely. I chose a 3-pack of fans that was about $28 after taxes. But anyway, once again, the Ryzen 3 3200G processor. The motherboard is the ASRock AMD Ryzen AM4 A320M-HDV. Impossible to memorize. For RAM, we have Patriot Viper SteelSeries DDR4 8 gigs at 3000 MHz. Our graphics card is the MSI Radeon RX 570 8 gigs. This is actually one of the parts that many of you recommended for my previous build. So I read the comments and I brought it for this build. The power supply is actually the same as last time. It's a 430 watt power supply from Thermaltake. This time we're not using an SSD, we're just going with the hard drive. I figured that an SSD could add it later over time. And really we could have added like a 120 gig SSD, but I figured we'd just go with the hard drive for this one. Try to keep the cost as low as possible. And for the case we have the Antec VSK10 with a window on the side. And of course we're using Windows 10 as our operating system. So those are the parts. Now we're going to build it, and then after that we're going to show some gameplay, maybe some benchmarks here and there, and see how it performs. Please make sure to leave a like on the video, comment down any suggestions for next build, which will have the Ryzen 5 1500. And also Twitter, Instagram, Discord, all that stuff will be down there if you want to follow me or join. Alright, let's go. So the build is finally finished. We're just installing Windows 10 Home here, and as you can see, it looks pretty good. We have the AMD stock cooler, an UpHere fan there, and 2 more here on the side. I left the top blank because I didn't have any extra fans, and the one that came with the case, it was just black, it doesn't light up. It wouldn't have matched with these that are already here, so I figured might as well leave the top completely empty and make it look a little bit more spacious. I just put Android there to chill, and we have a nice graphics card right next to it. So in case you guys are wondering, the mouse I'm using is the Redragon M808, and the keyboard is also from Redragon. It's the Draconic K530. Alright, so this is now a week after everything else that you saw before. And after using this computer for a week, I have to say there are some goods and some bads. Actually, it's really just one bad, but it's fixable and we'll get into it in a little bit. But I just want to say that this is so far the easiest computer I've put together. I don't know if it's the case, with the cable management, or just the components. It made it super easy to put it all together. It didn't take as much effort as the other one. This case has a power supply shroud on the bottom, so you could hide all the cables there and then route the necessary ones to the top. And that makes it really easy, but for some reason it felt like there were just less cables to deal with. I don't know, it's probably a sign of a good case. Anyway, as I touched on the fans and the components, everything looks very good. Both the motherboard and the graphics card and even the AMD stock cooler have a little bit of a white and black color combo going to it. And then you pair that with the RGB fans and they all match up together quite nicely. The only thing I didn't really like about the aesthetics are the mustard and ketchup colored cables sticking out of the power supply cables. Now they're sleeved for the most part, but you could still see the mustard colors on them right where you connect them, especially that power cable. It's ugly, but it's there, and at this budget, I mean, you can't really complain about it. Like I said, the only extra here were the 3-pack of fans, but there is room for improvement if you want to add 2 more fans. You have the space up top if you want to. You could also add a 240mm radiator if that's what you want. Overall, it's a very spacious case. The only thing I'm not so sure about with the case is the side panel. It's acrylic, it's not tempered glass, and I don't know how it's going to hold up against scratches over time. I have seen that acrylic panels tend to scratch up quite easily, so if you move it around a lot, do a lot of maintenance work on it, remove it, you know, stuff like that, or even bump it, you might be scratching it over time. Speaking of upgrade potential, the only downside I saw of this computer was the hard drive. Now, as you guys saw by the components, I didn't add an SSD, and that's a big mistake, I think. For an extra $20, you can add a 120 gig SSD from PNY or Kingston. You could find them on Amazon, and actually have one on the way to upgrade it, because right now it's running on only a hard drive, which is way too slow. Whenever I'm loading games, and sometimes even loading Chrome or anything like that, it just takes a while, and now that I've been so used to having an SSD on my laptop, on my main computer, everything else feels snappy except for this. So yeah, for an extra $20, make it snappy and it's perfectly fine. This motherboard actually has a slot for an M.2 SSD. They're a little bit more expensive, but they're also a lot faster. If that's what you want, this motherboard is capable of it. And now for the performance, possibly the main part of this first impressions. Now your typical watching YouTube videos, browsing the web, that's perfectly fine. It's snappy, it's quick, you're not going to run into any issues doing any of that. And the gaming also really surprising in a good way. Let's start off with Far Cry 5. Now if you don't remember, on my previous build, the one with the i3 processor, Far Cry 5 was actually quite difficult to run. It's not the case with this computer at all. It runs it at high settings, very good. It's really smooth, it just looks really good. I'm running around, getting into gunfights in Far Cry. Not online, it's just the story mode. But it doesn't slow down at all. It continues at a constant frame rate at around 55 to 60 at high settings. It looks really good. Now Grand Theft Auto 5 is a game that's, what, 7 years old now? But it's still very difficult to run for some computers, especially in the grassy areas of the map. Now my main computer here, at the highest settings, always dips down to maybe even 40 FPS when you get to the mountains, grassy areas. But this one surprisingly stays up there. It's also running at the highest settings, over 60 FPS, it's actually around 80, 70 or 80. And then when you get to the grassy areas, it holds up nicely. It actually doesn't really go below 60 FPS. It rarely does, and it's really smooth in grassy areas or on downtown streets. It's actually quite surprising and really enjoyable. Battlefield 1 is actually a quite easy game to run. Ultra settings, 1080p, all of these games are running at full HD by the way. It runs at over 80 FPS. It might dip down to the 60s if you're in an intense gunfight or, you know, a lot of explosions going around, but it never goes below 60. And that's the beauty of it. It's super good, very smooth. Warzone, on the other hand, that's probably the toughest one, especially because it's a big map, a lot of players, good graphics, textures, all that stuff. You're gonna have to run it at the lowest settings possible, because I ran it at medium, high, a mixture of medium and high, and it still lagged a bit. It tends to skip around, and when it finally feels smooth, once you get into a gunfight, it feels like it stops for a little bit. It skips, things take long to load. I wouldn't recommend it for Warzone. It's not going to be enjoyable unless you're willing to play it at the lowest settings possible. The training feels fine because there's nobody else there, and it's just you pointing at targets and stuff. But once you get online, once you get playing with other players, that's when it begins to slow down. And that's an issue. Now I'll take some extra time discussing about Fortnite because I know a lot of people are interested, as I was reading from the comments of the previous build. So Fortnite on low settings, you can have no issues whatsoever. It's running at over 90 FPS all the time, no problem. But it also doesn't look as good, but obviously because it's low settings. Move up to medium settings, looks a lot better. You're still getting over 80 FPS performance all the time. It's super smooth actually. So low and medium FPS, 100% perfect. Move into high settings, you're still getting excellent performance, well over 60 FPS, feels incredibly smooth, and it looks good. Even during gunfights, you're not going to go down below 60. And then even with epic settings, it's still over 60 at a good frame rate, you're still not lagging. Getting into gunfights, it feels incredibly smooth. I can't win a gunfight, but that's just me. But for this game, this computer actually performs a lot better than the one with the Intel Core i3 processor did. It's probably the graphics card that's really good. And the processor is actually really good too, now that I think of it. They're both a great combination to go together, the Ryzen 3 3200G and the RX 570. So all those games I talked about, they all run very well, except for Warzone. That one you might have to mess with the settings quite a bit. On top of that, the noise levels are always to a minimum. What do you hear now? That's how it stays. And the cooling is fantastic. The highest I saw it go to was like 62 degrees Celsius. And on idle, it's maybe 31 or something. It's really good, really cool. And if you have the money, it's $464. If you add an SSD, which I would recommend, it would be $484 around there. I would definitely recommend building it. This is the best sub $500 computer I've seen. Now, if you're going to a store to Best Buy, CyberPowePC, anywhere where you could buy a computer, you're not going to find one like this with these components under $500. You'll probably see it for like $600, $650. They're expensive, and knowing that you could build it for $484 with an SSD, again, it's something to know, and it's something you should do. So that concludes my video. If you guys enjoyed it, please make sure to leave a like, a comment down below, and consider subscribing. Next build will have a Ryzen 5 1600. Let me know of any components you want to see with it, or a case or something like that, and I'll try to get it for you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.